Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for another real-time watercolor tutorial. This one is about 10 minutes long in real time, not including drying times, although if you use a hairdryer then you can make it 10 minutes. So let's get into it. The first thing that I did was tape the borders of my piece of paper so that I have a perfect clean rectangle, and I just drew over them with a permanent marker, the corners rather, on top of the tape, just because it's really hard to see the borders when I use clear tape. If you have masking tape or something opaque, then obviously you're not going to have this problem. So the first thing you want to do is cover your rectangle, your landscape rectangle, in a layer of water using a mop brush. As always, I've linked in the description the products and brushes that I use if you wish to add them to your collection. And then while that layer is still wet, we are going to start applying our background gradient. So I'm starting with a blue color and then I'm fading that into a magenta, which subsequently fades into a yellow, and then I end off with pink or rather magenta, and then blue again. So we're kind of trying to create this mirroring effect, and I realized that I painted my colors a little bit too spaced out, so you can see me trying to fix that here. Don't worry about being perfect, and don't worry about trying to match the exact shades of the colors that I'm using, because that's insignificant. Whether you use a darker blue or a lighter blue, it's really ultimately going to depend on how many layers you paint on anyways. As you can see, this first layer is extremely light, and when it dries, it's going to be even lighter in appearance. Now, unfortunately, I forgot to hit record for the next part, but when we get to that, I will explain what to do next. Here, my layer is still wet, so I'm just adding some black at the top just to darken the sky. We are going to be flicking on some white acrylic paint to create a starry night sky, so ultimately you do want a fairly dark background gradient. Once that has completely dried, and like I said before, you can use a hair dryer, which can dry the painting in 30 seconds. You can go ahead and start applying your second layer. And for the second and any subsequent layer after the first, you are not going to be applying a layer of water. So you're not going to be using the wet on wet technique, you are going to be painting wet on dry. So you basically just want to keep applying your layers until you are happy with the opacity and the darkness of your colors. So here I'm on, I think, my third layer, and I may paint on one more layer after this, but you're basically just repeating the exact same colors that you used previously. You just want to keep building on those colors so that they appear darker to the viewer. Now, depending on what kind of watercolor paper you use, your gradient may look a lot less or more streaky than the one that you see here. Here I'm just using my Strathmore sketchbook, and although it is good quality paper, for gradients I really think that cotton paper is the best paper to use, because the gradient and the transitions between the colors is absolutely flawless on cotton paper, in my opinion. And I'm also painting this painting on the back of a painting that's already been completed, so the paper was already sort of pre-warped, which is probably why you're seeing quite a bit of streaking going on. But that's okay, because when we paint on our silhouette at the end, it's going to come together really nicely. So once you're happy with your gradient, your background gradient, and it's completely dry, either air drying or using a hair dryer to speed up the process, you can go ahead and grab some white acrylic paint and water it down just slightly, and then kind of tap it against another brush or pen or pencil, and ideally you want to create a beautiful starry sky effect. It took me quite a while to achieve the number of stars here, so just keep tapping away until you're happy with how many stars you have in your night sky. I also wanted to paint on the Milky Way or like a galaxy in the distance. So I took some white acrylic paint again. I dipped my brush into it and then dipped it onto a paper towel to take off the excess of the white acrylic paint because I just wanted like a smidge of that white acrylic paint since it is quite a bit more opaque, and I just dabbed on this beautiful galaxy Milky Way. Once you're happy with your starry night sky, you can begin to paint on the silhouette, I suppose. So I am going to be painting on some mountains. This painting, by the way, is inspired. I forget who it's inspired by, but I will link them in the description. I saw a photograph on Instagram of this person. It slipped my head, but I will include it in the description if you want to go check out where I'm getting this inspiration from. But like I said, we're painting on mountains, so you want to take a nice thin brush, probably a liner brush, but even a round brush will do because if you have a good quality round brush, they are nicely pointed at the end, which does allow you to create quite fine details. So you're gonna take black watercolor paint, and you don't want to water it down too much because you do want it to be quite opaque and sort of, cover up the starry night sky because you don't want the stars showing through the mountains, although that would probably look nice as well. And you can just go ahead and paint on your mountain range. It can look like mine, or you can just make up your own. It doesn't really matter. It's really just the silhouette itself that matters, that creates that really dramatic effect against the night sky. So as long as you're using black watercolor or any extremely dark shade of a color to create that silhouette, it will achieve the same effect. So while your silhouette mountain range is still wet, you want to take a dry brush. So it's just a regular watercolor brush that hasn't been dipped into water. It's completely dry. And you want to start flaring out or dragging down the black watercolor from the mountains onto the, I suppose, water or the lower half of our landscape painting, because we want it to look like the mountains are reflecting onto the surface of our water. And try to follow the shape of the mountains. So where the mountain peaks, obviously you're going to drag it out a little bit more than where the mountain dips. Don't forget to also paint another little mountain range on the left side of your painting. You can see that I slightly rotated my sketchbook, and that's just because I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to paint this way. But you can position your piece of paper however is most comfortable for you. I painted two little outcrops on the left side there just because I wanted to vary it up a little bit. And I also wasn't happy with the amount of black that dragged onto the shadowed portion of my mountains. So I went ahead and I took more black watercolor and dragged it down from the mountains down onto the lower half of my watercolor piece of paper before doing the exact same thing on the left side. I did want that shadow to be quite noticeable of the mountain, so I kind of kept dragging it down. You'll see me do it even more probably periodically. I also wasn't happy with the opacity of my galaxy, so I used that same technique that I mentioned earlier, where I dip my paintbrush into acrylic paint and then dab off most of it on a paper towel before making it more opaque on my painting. I added in some more stars on top of the galaxy just so that it didn't just look like a cloud of white. Finally, you can add a moon. I ended up filling in my entire moon because I wasn't happy with the crescent look, but you can do whatever you would like. Don't forget to peel your tape off, and there we have a almost 10-minute watercolor painting tutorial. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and I will see you in the next one.